Hey everyone, my name is Emily. Welcome back to my homestead and to week 5 of the 2025 Three Rivers Challenge. This is a pantry challenge where my family is eating through our food storage in the home, not going to the grocery store, except that we are purchasing milk during this challenge. We went through all the bagels that I made previously about 2 weeks ago, and they turned out much bigger and better this time. Sunday we had leftovers, but on Monday night I am making chicken tetrazzini. I start out with adding some sour cream, some homemade cream of chicken soup, salt, pepper, and garlic powder. Then I add in melted butter and some chicken stock. This is the chicken stock I had made last week. I get this all whisked together. And meanwhile, I had had a pot of water boiling on the stove, and I add some salt and spaghetti noodles to this. For the chicken tetrazzini, I break the spaghetti noodles up into at least fourths to make them in bite-sized pieces when this casserole is finished. And then I get out the last of our leftover chicken, and this gets chopped up into bite-sized pieces and added into our bowl of wet ingredients, along with the rest of a bag of frozen peas and our cooked noodles. And that all gets mixed together and then put into casserole dishes. The casseroles are topped with mozzarella cheese, followed by a little bit of cheddar cheese and a little bit of Parmesan cheese. Again, I am making one casserole to go in the oven, which will be covered in foil first, and then one to go in the freezer. And I typically package them for the freezer by putting some saran wrap closely pressed down to the top. I have some cardboard covered in aluminum foil that's the appropriate size to go on top of the casserole dish. And then I wrap that in foil as well, label it, and then wrap the whole thing in plastic again. And then it's ready to go in the freezer. Here is the chicken tetrazzini ready to serve for dinner tonight. And we ate on this for 2 nights. On Wednesday, I decided to tackle the abundance of eggs we had and try to use some of them up. I found a pound cake recipe. Most of them called for 6 eggs, but this particular one called for 6 eggs plus 6 egg yolks. So that was 12 eggs, and so I picked this one. I've never actually made a pound cake before, so I don't know how this recipe compares to one that just uses 6 eggs, but I'm greasing this pan while my youngest child put a pound of butter into the mixer. After the pan is all greased up with the vegetable shortening, I dust it with flour, and then we get the mixer started mixing the butter. I decided to start with the whisk attachment to whip the butter, and then we start separating the eggs. We needed to separate 6 egg yolks, so I decided to do that before cracking all of the eggs to make sure that I got 6 of them separated easily. And then I let my youngest crack the rest of the eggs that could be whole eggs. So it didn't matter if any of those egg yolks broke while they were being cracked open. While she's doing that, I scrape down the sides of the mixing bowl, and then we add in the sugar. And after that mixes thoroughly, I decide to switch to the paddle attachment. While I don't think the next step is completely necessary, I was just following this recipe because it was the first time using it, and it had me add the eggs, vanilla, and salt and whisk that together before adding that mixture in. And then we added just maybe a third of the liquid at a time into the mixer while it was working, and once it was well blended, I would add the next bit in until it was all incorporated. The leftover egg whites were saved in the refrigerator to use later on, and then it was time to add flour. The recipe called for adding the flour 1/4 of a cup at a time while the mixer was going, and waiting for it to get incorporated before adding the next scoop. And then it was ready to add to the pan. This is a very thick batter, so I spooned it in with a spatula evenly around this bump pan, and then I let my youngest spread it out evenly across the top, and it was ready to go into the oven. While the pound cake is baking, I get started on dinner for the evening. I am making a cheddar broccoli soup, and I start with dicing up an onion. In the pot I have heating on the stove, I add butter and the onions, and while these are cooking down, I start dicing up a carrot. I have just a few carrots left in the refrigerator that are store-bought, and these are the last carrots that I have in the house at this time. Once the onions were cooked down, we added some more butter to the pan, melted that, and then added in some flour, whisking that continuously for a minute or two, and then I started adding in the milk and then the chicken stock. I also added in the carrots and then added in some broccoli leaves from the freezer. Once the vegetables were tender, we turned the heat off and added cheddar cheese to finish off the soup. And here is my youngest child serving up her own cup of cheddar broccoli soup. Now back to that pound cake. It came out of the oven and cooled in the pan for about 20 minutes. Then we ran a knife around the inside edge of the pan, turned it out onto a cooling rack to cool the rest of the way. While it was cooling, we made an icing to drizzle over the top. We just used some powdered sugar and some milk until it was the consistency that we wanted it to be. This is a powdered sugar that I buy online that doesn't contain cornstarch. And this particular brand is very clumpy. I purchased a different brand previously that didn't clump nearly as bad, and I will probably go back to that one next time. Once we reach the consistency that we're looking for, we go ahead and pour it over the pound cake. And I really needed a larger platter for this because it really just went off of the plate onto the countertop, as you can see here. Oh well. And then I served some of the cake for the kids and myself, and it was delicious. It was a very rich cake. Really did not need a large slice to get more than enough, and this lasted us the entire week for desserts. Thursday night was a fast food dinner. This is the meat base I had in the freezer when I made something else earlier this month. I just popped that in the pan to get it defrosting while I move on to the next step, which is opening a whole bunch of cans. I've got 2 cans of tomato sauce, a can of black beans, which I drain, and a can of olives. I pour the liquid plus half the olives into a storage container to use later, and then I smush down the olives with the side of the knife and then chop them up finely to go in tonight's dinner, which is Tiana dip. Once the frozen meat base is thawed out, I add the olives to the pan, as well as the beans, tomato sauce, and then my herbs and spices. This includes a lot of chili powder, some parsley, a little cayenne, and some cumin, then pepper, as well as some garlic salt. I'm making this dish a little differently than I usually do because the meat base has green peppers in it and the Tiana dip doesn't usually have green peppers. I also usually use kidney beans, and I am out of those at this time, so I used black beans. But I get the lid on that and let it simmer for a while. And in the meantime, I'm making a side dish of corn. Originally, I used to make this recipe with corn in it. It gives it a little sweet note to some of the bites, but I can no longer eat corn My kids still enjoy it, so I'm making it as a side dish and they can add it if they choose to. Once the dish has simmered for a while, I add cheese to the top and then cover it until the cheese melts, and then it is ready to eat. Here is the final meal with the corn on the side, tortilla chips for the kids, and cassava chips, which are corn-free for me. I must just be in a soup mood this week because on Friday night we are having potato soup. I start with peeling 3 potatoes and getting those diced up and into some boiling water. And then I dice up an onion. I don't always add carrots to this recipe, but tonight I decided to, just so we'd have another vegetable in our meal, and I go ahead and add some frozen carrots to our boiling potatoes. Once those are finished, I drain them and put them in a separate bowl so I could use this pot to cook the onions. I add bacon grease as well as some butter to the bottom of a pan, and then add the onions in and let these cook down until they are clear. Then I add in some flour, stir that in for a bit. Then I slowly pour in a can of evaporated milk, followed by a quart of chicken broth. Once that is thickened up a bit, I add in about 3/4 of the potatoes and carrots, then mash the rest up, and then add that to the pot as well. The soup gets seasoned with salt and pepper to taste, and then we are ready to serve. And I'm serving it once again in mugs with optional cheddar cheese to sprinkle on top. That's the way I like it. It gets nice and melty, and this was a really delicious soup that really hit the spot on this cold winter's night. And to end our week on Saturday, my youngest child decided that she wanted to make a charcuterie board for everyone. This was her second attempt, as the dog stole half the ingredients the first time, but I didn't record any of her making this because I was asked to stay out of the kitchen while she prepared this. Thank you for joining me as I went through our pantry meals this week, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye.